It's time for Drummer Nation. Drummer Joe Corsello was born and raised in Stamford, Connecticut. Joe studied at Berklee under drum legend Alan Dawson and later with Joe Hunt. As the house drummer for Michael's Pub in New York, Joe backed jazz greats Red Norvo, Hank Jones, Zoot Simms, and pianist Marian McPartland. He also toured with Goodman and Peggy Lee. Joe is co-founder of the jazz rock band New York Mary, which recorded 2 successful records and toured with the B-52s, Patti Smith, Stevie Wonder, and Tony Williams' Lifetime. Joe currently travels with saxophonist Sonny Rollins and can be heard on recordings with Rollins, Marian McPartland, Goodman, Mike Mainari, and the list goes on.
Created specifically for practice sessions, quiet tone practice cymbals by Sabian are designed to respond and feel like traditional cymbals, right down to their clearly defined bell, so the drummers won't have to change the way they play. Quiet tone practice cymbals by Sabian.
I absolutely love playing drums, and I couldn't imagine not having that in my life. And I really, if I could help facilitate that and have an impact on your life so that you can play drums, that means the world to me.
When seated at the drums, pressure on the tailbone, lower back, and hip joints can lead to pain. Only Carmichael drum thrones are scientifically designed to relieve and prevent discomforts associated with prolonged sitting. Carmichael thrones, we got your back. Hello again, everyone. It's my honor to welcome Joe Corsello as my guest for this episode of Drummer Nation. Hi, Joe. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to see you again. I've run into you at NAMM a few times, or trade shows.
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. Yeah.
I've been aware of your career for a long time, but we'll talk about that in a few minutes. I'd like to get a little bit of background. Eventually, it's a couple of guys talking drums here. But a little bit of background. I know you came from you're from Stamford, Connecticut first, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And you came from a musical family?
I did. My dad, Anthony Corsello, was the original Hawaiian guitarist, which we could call steel guitars now, with the Sammy Kaye Orchestra. Swing and Sway with Sammy Kaye.
Swing and Sway with Sammy Kaye, that's right.
That's right, yeah. So, when I was about 5 years old, I remember all the musicians coming by the house, and one day the drummer came over and said, I got this piece of junk snare drum, I'm ready to toss. Would your son like it? And of course, I grabbed it. And then the next time he came over, he had a cymbal, and he gave me a cymbal. And so now I had a snare drum and a cymbal. And of course, then I started taking drum lessons. And so I was about 6 or 7 years old. And
well, they call that in sociology and education terms, they call that cultural capital. It's the stuff we kind of passively inherit as we come up.
That's true.
And they find that kids who don't, you don't read to them, they're not exposed to things. They're it holds them back when they try to advance.
That's true.
And so many musicians had family that were musicians, and I think that cultural capital kicks in. So when you're 5, 6, 7, you've got a lot in the musical library there that most people wouldn't have.
Well, I see that now. I have 4 sons of my own, and sometimes I hate getting in their car because I know the type of music that they play. And it was pretty much, and when I go back to thinking about my dad, growing up and listening to the Harry James records and listening to all the people that he was listening to at the time, I can actually say that, a lot of it I really enjoyed. But then I remember bringing home my John Coltrane record and my Sonny Rollins records, and my dad would say, "What is that? What is that?" He said, "Take that off. That's horrible. What is that?" So it's kind of like me getting in my son's car now and him playing rap. And,
we all turn into our grandfathers eventually. I kind of had the same experience. My dad was a singer and played guitar, and I grew up with all that music in the house, especially the crooners. And suddenly I'm bringing home Miles and Train, and Interstellar Space will still scare the shit out of anyone.
I was reading your bio, and I see that you were with the Glenn Miller Orchestra.
Yeah, I want to talk about that in a minute.
Yeah,
we'll get to that. That's part of our shared history.
Okay.
Our shared history. So you started doing gigs as a little kid, basically?
Well, not really.
Sitting in or hanging out?
I went through high school here in Stamford, and the music director really encouraged me at that point. I was going to summer camps, and I was going to anything to do with drums. And by the time I was a senior in high school, you would have cracked up if you saw my curriculum. It was a riot. It was Harmony 1, Harmony 2, arranging, choir, jazz band, orchestra, and English and history. They had to put those 2 in there.
Yeah, right.
Which really kind of bummed me out. But anyway, he told me about this college up in Boston called Berklee College of Music, and this was in 1964. And 1964, Berklee was just it was the ex-Schillinger House up in Boston. It was run by Lee Burke, and who was an accordion player, and it was just a school for accordionists.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and when I got up there in 1964, there was probably maybe, I don't know, maybe 10 drummers, and it was probably a handful of guitar players. But of course, we're talking about, guitar players, John Abercrombie, Gabor Szabo. I mean, you talked about the cream of the crop at that point.
I think what our cymbals brought to the Sabian family is that there is lots more hand hammering. They're all hand hammered, and so you really have to perfect the hammering technique and where to hammer on the cymbal. You don't want to get the cymbal too thin in a lot of places. They were willing to try it, and I think we came out with a great product that is a great musical instrument.
So I had the pleasure of and the honor to study with Alan Dawson. It was really just a real shot in the arm for me. And
I want to delve into that. Alan Dawson, for people who don't, first of all, if you don't know, Berklee is a great music school. It has been for many, many years and produced many, many, many wonderful musicians and still does. Alan Dawson is a noted drum teacher who played with Brubeck, among a lot of other people, but is a noted educator who had so many great students. So I want to dig into that a little bit. What was describe studying with Alan Dawson?
Well, Alan turned me on to, we only used really 2 books, and the 2 books we used were the Syncopation for the Modern Drummer by Ted Reed, and we used the Stick Control book. And he showed me so many different ways of playing through the book. When you first look at the book, it's, it starts off with the quarter notes, the eighth notes, the triplets, 16th notes. But he had me doing it in so many different ways. And by the time we got to the actual syncopation part of the book, he had me playing it in triplets. Like you're starting off with triplet word, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, and then you would start accenting all the syncopated notes. And then you would utilize your feet and in your hi-hat. And so he was really a musical drummer. I mean, for me, it was just like an eye-opening experience. And I use it with my students today.
Well, not only that, what I was going to say is, a lot of people use those books for those reasons, but Alan sort of invented that.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And the same thing with the Stick Control book. Right. Same exact method.
Applying it to the kit. When I got to North Texas in '73, they were doing those same things. And it's funny that I have a student I just yesterday told, get the Stick Control book.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
But the point is that Alan's interpretations of those books became standard percussion pedagogy.
Yes, it did. And shortly after that, Don, what was his name? I think he was an editor, Don DeMichael from Downbeat magazine. They cooperated together and came up with Alan Dawson's own book, which I have a copy of that he autographed for me back in 1964, which is, those kind of things I really treasure. And
I have a copy of it from early 70s.
Okay. Yeah.
Great book.
And Alan was just, like I said, even in the Stick Control book, he said, if you ever see a left underneath, that would be your bass drum. So if you had a figure like right, left, you could use your alternating sticks on the right. You could use right, left, and then when you see the left, that was with your foot. So putting those things together was just absolutely tremendous. It was just an experience that was, it really helps you to play very melodic drums. And it was great for learning how to play fours and playing choruses, etc.
That's what's so great about it. It's less independence oriented, although it does require a lot of independence. But it's more musical in nature than playing standard exercises.
Mm-hmm.
Hey everybody out there in cyber world, this is Adam Nussbaum.
Hi, Dave DeCenzo here.
Hi, Bermuda Schwartz here.
Hey everyone, Stanton Moore here.
Hey guys, John Tempesta here.
Hey everybody, this is John J.R. Robinson.
Hi, Todd Zuckerman here for the Drum Center of Portsmouth. They're knowledgeable, they'll be able to help you and guide you and make the right choices for you and the music that you play.
From Wingnut to Wuhan, these chaps know what they're talking about. Highly recommended. But what do I know? I'm a drummer.
So Dawson also had the rudimental ritual, right?
Yes.
Tell us what that is.
Well, I understand that Alan was a sergeant in the Army and played in the Army bands, because when I met Lenny DiMuzio from the Zildjian Company, who saw me performing when I was with a fusion jazz / rock band, he saw me up at Paul's Mall up in Boston. And he was telling me a story about how he had auditioned for the Army band and he flunked. And the guy that flunked him was Alan Dawson.
Well,
so I guess later they became really good friends, obviously. But I didn't realize that about Alan. I didn't know that he had been in the Army band and that he was I guess a sergeant in charge of the drummers. And so when you go to an Army band, like I was, when I left Berklee, actually when I was asked to leave Berklee, and I can tell you that story, I had to, come up with something to do. And at that time, the draft was very big in 1966. And I said, I better start, making some plans here. It's either I'm going to go to Vietnam with a machine gun, or I'm going to have to do something else. So a local recruiter sent me to an organization down in Maryland, an Army band. It was a field band. It was really a nothing kind of band. And he called me up on the phone and he said, "What are you, a wise guy?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, I just got your test results from the audition you took down in Maryland." And I said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "Well, you got 100 and they want you badly." He said, "But they're not going to have you." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "I'm going to set you up with an audition for the Army band." And I said, "The Army band?" He goes, "Yeah." He said, "The Army Field Band, which is the best Army band in the world." And I said, "Oh man." I said, "You got to be kidding." And he said, "No, I set up an audition for you. You're going to go to Governor's Island, and but the only thing is you have to join the Army for 3 years rather than be drafted for 2." And I said, "That's not a problem at all." So I went, I took the audition, and I passed with a 98. However, they needed a jazz drummer. They were forming a stage band to travel all around the country as a recruiting band. So they moved my grade up to 100, and I got accepted into the Army Field Band. So that's what I did for 3 years.
That's a great gig, and I think most people, still today, if you're in one of the top-notch bands in the service, they're great bands.
And it's all on rudiments. It's all built. So going back to Alan Dawson, it was all built on rudiments, and it was just it was tremendous. So for 2.5 years, I got an early out to go play with the Glenn Miller Band with Buddy DeFranco.
My new site, Stanton Moore Drum Academy, is the perfect online drum learning platform for any level drummer to learn how to play the drums the same way I did, with the advantage of having me road test the material on hundreds of stages, countless clinics, lessons, and master classes, and dozens of studio sessions every year. On the site, you'll find over 13 hours of video, dozens of written lessons, and fresh material gets added all the time. I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of you as subscribers on the site, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun.
Well, let's talk about that, because there's a relationship there. When Glenn died, the band became part of the first Air Force jazz band, I think.
That's right.
Right?
Yes.
So the service bands sort of came out of the Glenn Miller thing.
Yes, that's right.
Isn't that interesting? Right. And well, that was a great experience for you. Was Lenny still in that club in Boston when you were there?
Lenny's on the Turnpike was, yes, and I played it numerous times. I've gone up there since, the Army and all the other people that I played with. I've gone up there, with people like Joe Venuti and Chet Baker. I was up there with just numerous people.
Right,
so
and Alan played there a lot too, right?
Alan played there. I would take a cab or whatever I had to do, a subway from Boston when I knew that Alan was playing out there, and I would just sit there at the front table and just watch him with Jackie Byard and some really, really heavy people. And it was just, a lot of stuff that the kids don't do today, and it's just such a shame, I just love the idea that I lived through that era where, for $2 I could go see Miles Davis at Paul's Mall, or I saw Dexter Gordon. I saw, every one of those heavy. Bill Evans, just sit right in front of Bill Evans and listen to him play, and watch Marty Morell play, and it was a tremendous experience. And the kids just don't have that anymore.
No, Marty's a great friend. I lived in L.A. in the 80s, and for $1 you could go to Carmelo's, get in for $1 with a union card, and hang at the bar and talk to Shelly Manne.
Oh man,
those days are not there anymore. Sad to say. You got to get it on YouTube and stuff like that.
That's
But
correct.
let me back up for a second. You say you
Sure.
were asked to leave Berklee. I'm going to guess why. It's probably because you were gigging like crazy.
I was gigging. I was gigging every night.
Yeah, see, I thought so.
And finally, I joined a quartet by a guy. He was a saxophone player named Sam Rivers, and he called me up and he said, Alan Dawson had recommended you, and I was wondering if you could, play 7 nights a week. And I said, 7 nights a week? I said, I'm in college. And he said, well, and the drag part is from 8 o'clock at night till about 4 o'clock in the morning. And I said, you got to be kidding. And he said, no, it's at a club called the Peppermint Lounge down on South Washington Street, which is not a very good neighborhood. But he said, we're the intermission band. And I said, what do you mean intermission band? He said, well, like if Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons are there, we when they finish playing, we go up and we play for 15 or 20 minutes, and then another rock band goes on, and then we play for 15 or 20 minutes. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And I think it paid like $7.50 a night or something ridiculous, $5. And so I wanted to do it because I had called my friend Michael Cascuna, who he and I grew up together, and he's a producer. And I said, have you ever heard of this guy called Sam Rivers? And he goes, oh my God. He said, are you kidding, Sam Rivers? He said, he's a monster. He's this, he's that, he's this, that. So after doing that for quite a while, Lee Burke called me into his office and said, you kind of have a choice here. He said, because you had a course with John LaPorta, and he's never met you. So I said, yeah, it's a little tough when I was getting home at, 5 o'clock in the morning, and I would sleep through my first couple of classes. So he said, well, we don't have a choice. He said, but I'm going to put you on probation for the next semester. And I said, okay, great. And I continued to play every night of the week, and I didn't really care. And
well, yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
You're already doing what they're preparing you to do.
I wanted to do it.
But I got to ask you, Sam Rivers played with Miles. He was known to be pretty out. I can't imagine the band that, warms up the crowd after Frankie Valli. Sam Rivers.
We weren't playing really out. He was playing standard tunes, and he was keeping himself pretty straight ahead. And I guess he took the gig to really warm up to go on the road with Miles Davis, because one night he announced to the band, we had Vibes, Calvin Hill on bass, and myself. And he announced to the band, he said, guys, I'm going to have to leave for a couple of weeks. He said, I'm going on the road with Miles Davis. And I said to myself, yeah, and I'm going on the road with Santa Claus, I mean, that was basically how I felt about what he was saying to me. And I immediately went home and I called up Michael Cascuna again, and I said, Sam Rivers said that he's going on the road with Miles Davis. He goes, yeah, he is. He's going to Japan. So I felt like a moron. But anyway, he left, and another saxophone player came in and replaced him. I don't know who that was. And at that point, Lee Burke called me in again and said, you're out of here. And I said, okay, nice. Yeah, it was a great experience. Thank you. Which I thought was funny, because here's Berklee throwing me out of their school, and about 4 or 5 issues later in Downbeat magazine, they called and asked me if I would do an ad for Berklee College of Music.
Right. Well, they didn't really throw you out. They asked you to make a choice.
Yeah.
And it's a good choice you made. So how do you go from Sam Rivers to Glenn Miller? How'd that happen? Hi, this is Michael Vosbine, your host for Drummer Nation, and I do the show as a labor of love, but I could use a little help. If you'd like to be a patron of the show, please go to the site patreon.com/drummernation. Help us out. Thanks.
Well, after I left Berklee, again, I said I had a choice to make, because I knew the draft was, they were coming pretty close, and they changed my status from the 2S to the 1A, and I said I'm probably going to get called next. So before I do that, I contacted the local recruiter, and et cetera. So I spent 2.5 years with the Army Field Band, and we were stationed in Fort Wadsworth in New York City. So it was tremendous there. Yeah. It was just, and I was out traveling with the jazz band we had. It was a 13-piece jazz band, and all the guys in the band were like Lou Soloff on trumpet, Michael Garson, who ended up going and playing keyboards with the rock and roll guy. I can't think of his name now, but he was with him he just passed away. And he played keyboards with him for 25, 30 years. Mm. But in any event, the band was just absolutely, it was killer band. And all of a sudden, I was in the Union Hall one day. I was studying with Joe Hunt. Now, I don't know if that name rings a bell to you.
Yeah, Joe Hunt, great drummer, very musical, and played with Bill Evans.
With Bill Evans and Stan Getz. He's on that great record, the Cafe Go-Go.
Right, also known for his tasty, hard-swinging and musical soloing.
Yes.
Which you would imagine playing with Bill.
the Army paid, and they said, you can go to any teacher you want to go to. Who do you want to go to? And I said, well, I understand Joe Hunt is living in New York. I would love to study with him and, really get into his head and find out, how he's doing the things that he's doing with the new bossa novas that are coming out and the sambas and, that beautiful swing feeling that he had.
Sorry, I'm doing a few things here. I'm sorry. I'm listening. I'm doing a few things here.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I studied with Joe for about almost a year. And I was traveling back and forth from Manhattan to Staten Island back again, and he was on. And I that's what I do when I find a drummer that I really find does something that really catches my eye. I pick up everything that they're on. I have one shelf of just Roy Haynes. I have another shelf of just Bill Stewart. I have another shelf of Adam Nussbaum. I have another shelf of, and I try to listen to what everyone is doing. Like even when Steve Gadd came into the picture, and I remember doing a lot of studio work, and they would tell me you're only going to be here for a year or two until we find another drummer with some great ideas, and you're out of here. But that never happened with Steve Gadd. But I see it happening with a lot of the other guys that come up.
I got a joke about that.
They use you.
I got a joke about that. Before we do it, can I get you to move this way again? Your son's encroaching on your shoulder there.
Okay, sure.
I just don't want you to get whited out. That's much better.
That
I'll cut that out.
Okay.
Okay, so the joke about the studio musician, similar to what you're saying, is there are 4 stages in the life of a studio musician. Who's Joe Corsello? Get me Joe Corsello. Get me a young Joe Corsello. Who's Joe Corsello?
I love that. I like that.
No offense. That's it's sad but true. It wasn't true in Gadd's case, but
no, it wasn't true in his case. No, because he
yeah.
kept coming up with a lot of different ideas, and boy, I'll tell you. Yeah.
Now, so you go on the Miller Band. How did you were prepared by playing all this other big band music?
Yeah. So the senator from up in Connecticut, Anthony D. Trulia, his name was. He was a great senator, and he was a good friend of mine. And he said, how would you like to go with there's an opening in the Glenn Miller Band. I said, how would you know that? And he said, well, I'm friends with a guy by the name of Richie Bars.
Oh, yeah.
And Bars was the baritone player in the band.
For a long time.
Yeah. And so Richie Bars contacted me and asked if I would go with the Glenn Miller Band with Buddy DeFranco. And I said, well, I don't know about the Glenn Miller Band, but I'd love to play with Buddy DeFranco. Being a jazz musician, I thought that would be tremendous. And so they said, we'll be at the Edison Hotel in Manhattan. Just bring your trap case. We have a set of drums for you. And bring your own cymbals. And we open tonight at blah, blah, blah in Pennsylvania at one of the veterans places. Because that was basically all the tours that we did. Mm-hmm. And so I did it. And the band was just great. We had Joe LaBarbera's brother, John, was in the band playing trumpet, and a great arranger.
Writing too, yeah.
It was so funny when I opened the book. They were all the original drum parts to the Glenn Miller Band. I mean, they were yellow, and if you touched it the wrong way, it would break in half. But I got to learn all that music, and then
it's a great book, isn't it? It's very pretty.
It was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. And we had a great piano player and a really great bass player. I don't remember their names, but Buddy DeFranco wanted to feature the quartet a lot. So we would play quartet things in the middle of all the concerts. And he just played like it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous.
Well, I think the last good band at the Miller Band, for people who don't know, that's called a ghost band. Where the leader dies, the estate owns the property, the intellectual property, and they put the band out there. And it works great for everybody because people still get to dig the band and they hire a leader. But I think Buddy DeFranco represented the last of the true great Miller bands. Because he was such a great player and he hired great players. Where when I did it years later, it's basically kids. I mean, I was 22. And there wasn't anybody of note on the band, nor was I. And the band wasn't that great, and neither was I. And it was a great opportunity for me. But I think you landed in the last really, truly great Miller bands.
And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. I mean, watching especially the older guys. There was a tenor player. I guess he was one of the original tenor players. And watch him on a bus drinking milk of magnesia because his stomach was totally shot from drinking alcohol all those years.
I think I know who that is. Yeah. Juicing on the band all night and then drinking milk of magnesia in the bus after that on the hit and runs.
Yeah. So we toured from like New York. We went all the way to California. We went back again. And And then I said to myself, I'm starting to get a lot of calls from a lot of other people, and maybe I should, it's time for me to leave the band and, start doing this other stuff. So I left the band and started playing. I was the house drummer at Michael's Pub in New York City. And Michael's Pub was bringing in people like Dave McKenna. They were bringing in Zoot Simms. They were bringing in just a whole plethora of a million great different musicians. So I did that for a while. The guy there wanted to hire me. Gil Wiest was the manager of the club at the time, the owner, and asked me if I would like to be house drummer. And I said I would love to be house drummer. I said that would be tremendous for me and a great experience. And I played there, and then Marian McPartland came in and played, and she hired me for her trio. So I played with Marian's trio for probably 3 or 4 years and had a blast with her. We had Michael Moore, we had Rick Petrone, we had Rusty Gilder, different bass players, and it was a great experience for me because she played everything from a standard tune like Laura to Ornette Coleman's Ramblin', and it was great. So I got to record with her a couple of times, which was great, and we became really good friends until I went with Peggy Lee. Paul McCartney had written music for Peggy, and the album was called Let's Love. And Peggy's agent had called me and said, we're putting this band together. It's going to be a nucleus of, a rhythm section plus Joe Beck on guitar. He said, the band's going to be great. I'll send you some tapes so you can listen to them and you can learn the music. But we're going to be doing this music that Paul McCartney wrote for Peggy. And I'm thinking we're just going to go out with a quartet, but at the actual rehearsal at the Waldorf Astoria, there was like a 30-piece orchestra with harps, and there was a keyboard player, and there was an electric keyboard player that played synthesizer and everything else. And on the original recording, it was Harvey Mason. And it was just a kick for me because I'm trying to emulate Harvey Mason, which nobody can do. Right. Harvey is just a tremendous drummer. And but I winged it, and we ended up doing about 7 months on the road. We did all the Fairmont hotel chains with Peggy Lee.
I remember those, yeah.
It was just absolutely incredible. It was incredible. But who's in the audience one night in New York City at the Waldorf Astoria was Benny Goodman. And then I heard from his agent, his manager, Muriel Zuckerman, her name was, and she called me up and she said, Benny Goodman heard you perform with Peggy Lee and he would love to have you join his group. And I just said, who? And she said, Benny Goodman. And I said, Benny Goodman? I thought he died like 10 years ago. She said, no, he's still he's still very active.
Great musician, too.
I know, yeah. So the first gig was at the Eastman Theater up in Rochester, and I'm like laughing. I'm saying, what is it going to be? Like 5 people are going to show up? Mm-hmm. Well, it was not only so sold out that they had to sell seats now on the stage. So I had people sitting right next to me at the Eastman Theater.
And when would this have been? What?
This was in 1971.
So you were still thinking of Benny Goodman from Sing, Sing, and Carnegie Hall in '39, exactly. I think it was.
But the band was just, when I started seeing the musicians show up, I mean, it was Zoot Simms, it was Irby Green, John Bunch on piano, Bucky Pizzarelli on guitar, Slam Stewart on bass, Peter Appleyard on vibes.
Legends all across.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
So I started getting nervous at that point. And then when I saw him setting up all the folding chairs on the stage, I said, now I'm really going to get nervous. And, because I had gone to Eastman every time with Marian McPartland up to Rochester, and we played the Round Towner. And I became very friendly with John Beck, who obviously is Steve Gadd's guy. And I would hang out every day at Eastman with John Beck, and he would teach me a lot of the classical snare drumming parts and stuff. And he and I became really, really good friends. And anyway, so that's my story with Benny. Excuse me. And
now I want to ask you something else. I understand this jazz lineage and big band and combo and modern stuff and older stuff. But I was looking at your discography and I realized you played with a band I had a record of in the 70s called New York Mary.
Right.
Which
so
was
when
a
I
funk,
was with Benny.
That was a funk band. That was a fusion band.
It was a fusion funk band, right? Exactly.
And that was right around the time you were working with Benny Goodman and Peggy Lee.
Right. Right. I finished with Peggy Lee, and Marian McPartland wouldn't talk to me anymore because of my association with Benny Goodman for some reason. I think the two of them had some kind of big falling out, and she could not believe that I would leave her to go with Benny Goodman. So that ended our relationship was over. But while I
Believe
was
it.
with Benny, it was a funny story because Benny found out that I lived in Stamford, Connecticut. And he said, that's where I live. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, I live up on blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, gee, I live 2 blocks down the road from you. And at that point, he started inviting myself and my ex-wife at the time to go up to the house for cocktails. And, with he and Alice, his wife. And we would go up to the house on Sunday afternoons, and we'd sit, and his wife would make martinis, and we would sit there and drink and talk. And I found him to be a really nice guy. I mean, I was with Benny. I did 3 world tours with Benny, and in a course of like 3 years. And I remember him sitting there one night, and he said to me, he said, "Oh, Joe," he said, "we're cleaning the garage out in the attic." And he said, "And I found Gene Krupa's drum set." He said, do you want it?" Before I tossed it, My ex-wife immediately said, "What's he going to do with another drum set? Drum sets in the house?" And I said, "Yeah, you're right,
Really?
Hence, that's why she's my ex-wife. But anyway, I didn't take the drum set.
You didn't get it?
I didn't get the drum set. It's an old Levy Ludwig kit, and
it was Gene's.
Gene's original drum set. So I have no idea. I know.
That hurts me.
No idea whatever happened to him.
Oh, isn't that a shame?
But we did a lot of recordings with Benny up at his estate in here in Stamford, and the Columbia mobile studio would drive up, and we would record in his bathhouse. He had a beautiful swimming pool and backed up to a golf course. And he had a 9-foot Steinway in there, and we would record in there with Zoot and all the guys in the group. And we would rehearse there. If we had a European tour, we would rehearse there. And my association with him was just tremendous. But in the meantime,
this is your host, Michael Vosbine, and I'd like to thank our friends at Sabian Cymbals, Sound Synergies, Stanton Moore Drum Academy, and Drum Center of Portsmouth. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.